Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. My name is Heather, and on this channel we like to walk a very fine line between a shopping addicted makeup monster and a responsible adult with a makeup hobby. I really enjoy eyeshadows, singles, palettes, multi-chromes, duochromes, shimmers, blushes, highlight, lip gloss, basically everything except pressed glitters. And today we are going to be doing a video talking about my favorite dupes for the new Melt Mary Jane palette. If that sounds like something you're interested in, stick with me. We're getting into it right now. Alright, and if you're interested in how I got this look, this video will be coming out on Friday, and it is using the Makeup Maniacs Cosmetics C'est La Vie palette. So if you are interested, definitely make sure you subscribe so that you can check this video out Friday. Let's get into the good stuff. So the first thing that I want to do is show you a picture of the original Mary Jane palette, and I'll show you some swatches if I'm able to pull like some good quality swatches. The things that really kind of anchor themselves in my mind about this palette are like the gunmetal, smoky, pewtery gray type shades that are metallic, because they do look very like foiled and gorgeous when they do the swatches. And then there's a handful of more like bronzy, cool tone, grungy, antique brass type shades. And you know, it almost leans towards like a matte army green, but not quite. So you're looking at more of like matte khaki brown in the palette, and then a couple of like just brown mattes. So I think, you know, the palette in general is very cool toned, it's very neutral. And so when I was looking through my collection, I was thinking about what are the things that I have in my collection that really run that kind of gamut of shades. And I was surprised at how much stuff I was able to pull from my own collection, because I really didn't think I had that much in the way of smoky, cool tone neutral palettes, but apparently I do. So let's take a look and see what I have instead. I'm going to start with the most obvious things first, and then I'm going to branch out to palettes that you might have that have like one or two shades that would be similar to this type of vibe, but wouldn't necessarily give you the entire palette. So if you're thinking there's maybe one or two things in the palette that you're really drawn to, but not the whole palette, then those options might kind of spring something in your mind that you already have in your collection. And so when I'm talking about these palettes, what I'm going to try to do is put a little bit of a like swatch so that you can see the shades that I'm talking about specifically. I'm not going to swatch the entire palette because I don't think that that's necessary for many of these palettes, but I am going to try to swatch the shades that I'm referencing so that you can see them a little bit more closely on what they would look like on my skin tone, at least, to be able to help guide you as to whether or not this would be a satisfactory dupe for the Melt Mary Jane palette. So let's start with the most obvious, and that's the Urban Decay Naked Smoky palette. So when I looked at this palette, compared to the Melt palette, you actually have a really similar color story. So you have these shades right here. Let me just hide my shame with the mirror. This whiskey shade I think is very similar actually to the Sensimilia shade that's in the Melt Mary Jane palette, which is like that deep dark kind of brown matte that's in the palette. And then I think you have some really pretty like neutral kind of this armor slanted. Those colors are really going to be nice to give you that kind of like platinum metallic-y type shade. Now I will say these are not formula dupes by any stretch, because I think the Urban Decay Naked formula is much more subtle than what the Melt palette appears in swatches. I only have the Melt She's and Parties palette, and I know their formulas kind of vary from palette to palette, so I can't speak to the actual Mary Jane palette formula. But in terms of like color, this is what we're looking at here. You've got a couple of kind of like neutral shades, so you have some neutrals here to play with. And then I think this Black Market and Smolder really work very nicely for really deepening up and making this a very, very smoky neutral look. You do have a couple of pops of shimmer here for the more bronzy type shimmers, and then that more golden type shimmer, you do have this shade on the end, which is called High. And so I think that this palette, if you already have it in your collection, will give you a very similar eye look, even though it may not be the exact same eye like finishes on your eye. The next one to talk about is the Revolution Pro Night and Day palette, and it looks like this. So this palette, let me pop this out. This is supposed to be a dupe for one of the Pat McGrath palettes, but I wanted to pull it out simply because it does have these kind of cool tone neutrals, and then it does have these kind of two pewter sparkly kind of shades, and you can see even in the light here, they do have a lot of good reflection, and then you do have a nice black. So I think between these four shades, if you're looking just to make one kind of like smoky toned eye look, you could get away with using this palette if you already have it in your collection. The next one to talk about is the Lime Crime Venus palette. This is the Venus Immortalis palette, and a lot of people like hated this palette, and I'm not sure why. I actually really enjoyed it, so I don't know if I just got like a good one and everybody else got a dud, but it is what it is. This palette has beautiful, beautiful shimmers in it. Again, this is almost pulling more of like a taupey type neutral shimmer, and then you have this Hail shade, which is definitely more silvery in tone. This does have some like reflectance to it, but I find when you put it on the eye, it basically blends out to nothing, so I don't really count that one too much. And then you do have these 3 shades that you can use to really make that like smoky kind of crease work and get that outer V being very dark, and then you can use these 2 to really make the look shine. So I think if you have this palette already, or if you can find it on clearance and that's really all you're looking for out of the Mary Jane palette, you might be happy enough just using this one. The next one that I wanted to mention is the ColourPop Blow and Smoke palette. I think it was originally called something else and then they had to change it, probably because like some copyright whatever, but this palette, and of course all the little shades want to jump out at all times. But this palette, very cool toned, very smoky. You've got really nice metallic metal looking shimmers here. You've got a couple of these like sequin type shades, and then you've got some nice mattes to be able to work with to make a really nice smoky look. This isn't going to give you any of those like grungy bronzes or browns, so this really doesn't go the full spectrum of what the Melt Mary Jane palette does. But again, if you're really just looking for that like metallic pewter gunmetal smoky eye, I think this palette would work just as well, and this would be like $12-ish as compared to $58. Although handle with caution because Magna's not very strong. Now if you're looking for the absolute most affordable option to give you that metallic smoky eye, I'm gonna have to give it to this Makeup Revolution Black Pearl palette. I mentioned this in my last palette roundup, and I really like this palette. I believe it's $6. I believe it's $6, and it looks like this. It definitely pulls a little bit more plummy, so just bear with me. I know this, like, ignore the lilac, okay? But you have this kind of gunmetally pewter shade here, and you have this metallic silver up here, and then you've got a handful of neutrals here that I think work really nicely. This is kind of a satin, but I basically just think of it as a matte. But I think these neutrals would work really nicely in order to make that kind of like grungy smoky look. And again, $6 compared to $58, like that's a huge price difference. So if you're thinking you want the Melt Mary Jane palette, but you're thinking you may only use a look like that a couple of times a year, maybe save yourself some money and get something small like this, and then you can add something else more special to your collection as new releases come out the rest of the year. Now, if you're looking for just a couple of like special pops, then you may already have a palette in your collection that would do that for you. One of the things that came to my mind was the Lunar Beauty Eternal Eclipse palette. So this is not the same like spectrum of color as, oh God, how can I hold this? There we go. So this is not the same spectrum of color as the Melt Mary Jane palette by far. However, you have this beautiful gunmetal here. This is probably the best silver I have in my entire collection. You have this sort of like purple leaning gunmetal type silver shade here. You've got a really great black, you've got a gray, you've got some neutrals here. Again, they're not the same neutrals as what's in the Melt Mary Jane, but it could be enough if that's what you're looking for. When I'm thinking about Melt Mary Jane, what I'm thinking of, what I'm lusting after within that palette is those pewter gunmetal type shades. So that's what I'm drawn to, and that's what I'm pulling out of my collection. So I think between those shades, you would really be able to make a very special, very pretty, metallic, kind of silvery gray look. The next one I'll talk about is again from Makeup Revolution, and this is the Forever Flawless Enchanted palette. I picked this up last year at Halloween time, and really what drew me into this palette was the little skull impressions inside the pans. So all of the mattes have these like skull impressions in here. What I think would be similar, and again we're looking at just a couple of things here, this is definitely not a dupe for that palette, but the couple of similar shades would be like Star, Shadow. You've got Inky, which is actually a matte blue, but again it could be nice to kind of bring a little bit of like color and depth to a otherwise very smoky platinum eyeshadow look. And then you have Sable. The shade Creeper kind of borderlines on that Sansamelia shade, but I think it's a little bit more warm toned, and then I think the rest of the palette is going to be a little bit too warm toned to really mimic what's in the Mary Jane palette. But again, you could make a smoky metallic eye out of this. Alright, the next one, and these are the palettes, like I said, these are the ones where you kind of have to use your imagination a little bit because we're not pulling the entire color story out of the Melt palette. But the next one I have for you is the BH Zodiac palette. I haven't gotten a chance to play with this one a whole lot, but it was one of those palettes that like every time I saw it in the store, I wanted it, and I just couldn't talk myself out of it, so eventually I just picked it up. And the shades that I was thinking about for this one would be Gemini. In some respects, you could probably get away with Taurus. This Capricorn shade, along with this kind of like khaki green brown shade, I think really lean in that direction of being like a grungy, smoky, kind of cooler toned look. You do have a gray and a black in here that can really complete a look. So again, while it's not a perfect color story, and while there's plenty of other colors in this compared to the Melt Mary Jane palette, this is infinitely cheaper, and you might be able to get away with the look that you're kind of desiring out of the Melt Mary Jane palette with this palette if you already have it in your collection. As far as some mattes, some cool tones, if you're not necessarily looking for something that's completely like gunmetal gray, and you want something that's maybe like gray-ish toned mattes or taupes, and then like some of those kind of metallic-y, kind of golden brown shades, then I would ask you to check out the Profusion Smoky palette, which looks like this. So again, not a perfect dupe, but you do have this shade here, which is very, very taupey, and I think it would be very similar to the lightest shade that's a metallic in the Mary Jane palette called Kali, which is the one like all the way on the right hand side of that palette. So I think this shade would be very similar, and you do have one that leans a little bit more warm toned if you're not looking to be quite so cool. But then I think using Graphite, Top Notch, and Raven, you could make a nice smoky eye out of that as well. And again, you know, price is a factor for a lot of people. So if you're looking for something like that, you don't want to spend $58, but you want kind of that vibe, or maybe you're a little intimidated by the entire color story of the Melt palette, then using something like this Profusion palette, which is only $5, may be a little bit more approachable for you, may give you something that's a little bit more wearable for you, and it's $5. So if you don't like it, if you don't like how that color story looks on your eyes, you haven't wasted $58. And then the last palette I just wanted to draw your attention to literally for one shade, and it is the KVD Matte Metal palette. So this palette came out a long time ago, and it was one of the only things that I kept after Kat Von D pulled all her nonsense, and I was like, I just can't get rid of this palette. I can get rid of the other stuff that I have of hers, but I can't get rid of this palette, and I'm so glad that I did because they got rid of her, and then I can keep my palette. But this shade right here, Tinsel, is like this super foily, metallic, shimmery silver shade, but it's not like a bright silver. It's like a 50% like medium, mid-tone silvery shade, and I think it looks so nice as an inner corner highlight. It would look nice as all over your lid. It would look really pretty as like the first third of your lid if you were going to put like a deeper metallic throughout the rest of your lid. So I wanted to remind you, if you have this in your collection, that you might be able to make a look similar to what you're vibing towards with this palette too. But again, just for that one shade. Alright, and then let's talk about two more palettes. Now, I've been talking a lot about the like pewter, gunmetal, silvery type shades, and I think what I'm excluding from those picks that I've already shown you is more of the antique, brassy, bronze, coppery, type shades that are also included in this palette. So I wanted to bring out two more palettes that kind of leaned more in that direction. The first of which is the ABH Sultry palette. So if you have this palette, you'll remember, if I can get the little brush out of it, that you have shades like Ember, Cinder, Teak. Those are all going to be very like grungy, kind of bronzy, antique type shades that would look very, very pretty in an eye look. You have some really dark shades here that you can smoke out and make a very, very smoky, dark colored, bronzy eye. So I wanted to draw your attention to that. And then of course you have Pearl and you have Fresh that you can use as sort of inner corner, transition, you know, things like that. You guys know how to put on eyeshadow clearly. And then you have Steampunk here, which pulls a little bit more gold, but again, this whole palette is very cool toned, so it's going to feel very similar to what you're going to see in the Melt palette. And so if you're looking for more of those colors and you don't necessarily care about like the pewter, gunmetal, silvery shades, then something like this that you have in your collection may serve the right purpose for you. And last but not least, I could not do a palette roundup talking about my palette comparisons and dupes without at least pulling one Nomad palette. Again, Nomad Cosmetics, one of my favorite eyeshadow brands, and I thought of their Berlin Underground. And when I say I should preface that my aunt, Decay Unfiltered, thought of this palette, and as soon as she did, I was like, oh my gosh, why did I not think of that? Because you are so right. This palette is all of those like grungy street colors. So you have this really cool color story. Most of everything in here is like satin or metallic. This SO36, Techno, Love Parade, Club Unit, Hansa, even this one, the Chaos Stage, these shades I think would make a really cool metallic smoky eye, even if it's not exactly the same as what's in Melt Mary Jane. If you have this and you're leaning more towards those bronzy type colors that are in the Mary Jane palette, this might be able to pull a very similar look for you that you'd be happy enough with that you may not even need the other palette. And then lastly, I did just want to pull a couple of like little topper things, because one of the things that I am the most drawn to, again, like I said, in the Melt Mary Jane palette is those like dark pewtery type shades, the silvery type shades, and the silver glitter within the shades, because I think we see a lot of like golden glitters in things, but we don't necessarily always see silver. So I wanted to pull a couple of things that I had that pull more silver. If you're looking for a purely silver glitter, this is the Ashley Lee Galaxy glitter, and this is an eye safe cosmetic glitter, and it's in the shade Constellation, but it is just a pure silver color, like straight up pure silver. So this would be something that you could use to kind of top over the lid look to really bring it to that extra like next level if you're looking for like a glitter topper. Then I also pulled the e.l.f. This is one of their little like Stila dupes that they have, which are these like metallic glitters, and this is a black base with silver glitter throughout, and the shade is called Black Magic. It's really hard to read on the bottom of the container, but I think this is a really cool thing. You could do this with like you know, just like a fun liner, or you could do this by itself over the lid and really, you know, bring some depth, some dimension to the eye look that you're going for. The last thing that I think kind of runs in that same vein would be the NYX Glitter Goals, and this is a glitter liner in the shade Diamond Dust, and again, it's just a pure silver glitter, and it comes on a really, really skinny brush applicator. I don't know if you can see that. There, you can kind of see it. So this one really, really skinny, and you can just kind of paint this in the areas that you want it to do. So you could do like a really dramatic wing, you could do kind of like a cut crease and trace out the cut crease, you could do just a little bit on your inner corner to really make things pop. You could do a lot of things with this, and I think it's about $7. So if you feel like you have some of these other palettes, but you really just want something to take it to the next level, using one of these toppers, glitters, or even liners could really just elevate the look and make you feel like you got your $58 look without spending that $58 price. Okay, and with that being said, that is everything for this video. Let me know in a comment down below, are you guys thinking about picking up this palette, or are you passing over it? If I had unlimited money, I think I would definitely pick up this palette, but because I want to kind of pick and choose the things that I'm purchasing more cautiously, and I don't want to continue to purchase like tons of duplicates in my collection, I think with what I have, I already feel like I have enough to be able to create that like smoky, intense eye as to what I'm looking for. I'll try to see if I can include a couple of pictures here and here of some looks that I did earlier this week that really, you know, were inspired by this new launch, and so you can kind of see how these palettes would play together with that. And I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and please subscribe before you go. I will catch you in my next video. Bye.